there's a third point of contention, which is perhaps even more, irritable for both sides, and that is the government wants Reserve Bank to part with its capital. It believes that it is overcapitalized, and there have been several studies on this even during your time. Do you think that that's a legitimate contention? Should the Reserve Bank give in part of the way, part of the capital? What's the way to find meeting ground? Because there doesn't seem to be any.
Yeah. Look, this is a contentious issue and sometimes a poorly understood issue. So let me try and explain a little bit. One, the Reserve Bank's equity is a wholly owned asset of the government of India. It doesn't belong to the Reserve Bank, it's the government's equity. And certainly it ultimately is an asset of the government. Now, beyond that, there is a question of how well capitalized the central bank should be. Now, like any entity, a corporation, which does deals abroad, the reason for adequate capitalization is for counterparties to believe in the strength of the Reserve Bank and to think that they will the Reserve Bank will honor promises it has made. For example, when we did the swap deal in 2013, it was a commitment by the Reserve Bank that it would honor those swaps. And without the kind of equity that we had backing us, it would be difficult. So the board, in my time, essentially decided that a viable sort of level for the Reserve Bank would be to have a AAA credit. Why AAA? Because India itself has a country rating of BAA, and so relying on the country rating would give us very high cost financing if we ever went out to get that financing. Instead, we should have a balance sheet which is itself cast iron and capable of raising money in dire need from outside with a AAA rating. So that was the decision of the board. And since then, we've tried to put out an analysis of what it would take to get that AAA rating. So that's one, the creditworthiness of the Reserve Bank. Second, what can it pay out as dividends? Well, the accountants, especially a really respected one like Mr. Maligam, who used to be on the board, told us that you cannot pay more than the realized profits. So that is number two. You have to realize the profit. You cannot just pay out what is not realized profit. So, for example, the gains on the assets, the unrealized capital gains, which is a big part of the RBI's equity, which comes from the foreign exchange assets we hold, we just can't pay it out like that. That's number two. The third, which is the least understood but perhaps the most important in constraining the RBI, is that every year it can only create so much money. Now, beyond that, essentially additional monetary creation would be inflationary. So every year we set ourselves a target, and that is the money that is used to buy OMOs in the market and essentially provide indirect second-hand financing to the government by clearing space in market balance sheets for them to buy government bonds. Now, the reality is that amount is limited. If today, let us say the government wants a 3 lakh crore dividend, and that can be realized based on the first criterion that there's enough in the balance sheet, and two, that we have profits which allow that payment, it still will hit the third criterion, that we can't create 3 lakh crores of additional money without selling government bonds in the market to take it back, because otherwise it would be inflationary. The bottom line is there is no free lunch here. There is no additional money the government can get, because whatever we pay will have to be taken back beyond that profit that we pay to them as dividends. So by all means, there could be a debate about whether the entire profit is paid or some is held back. My guess is that with the recent depreciation of the rupee, the balance sheet is healthy enough. Remember, we hold dollar assets. So the balance sheet is healthy enough that possibly the entire profit could be paid. But whether there's an additional windfall, I'm afraid that these constraints actually prevent that. I have tried explaining this many times, in speeches and so on. Unfortunately, because it involves monetary economics, it's a little harder to understand.
Okay, well, what if the board, see, in your case, the board said that the Reserve Bank should have AAA status. What if the board, there is a board meeting coming up on November 19th, if it told the Reserve Bank governor to hand over a part of the capital?
Well, so let's, I think, address the issue of what the role of the board is, right? The role of the board in the Reserve Bank has historically been not to take operational decisions, but really to focus on broader strategy as well as ensure good governance. So they are there to ensure the government's sort of money is well spent in the Reserve Bank, that, for example, the Reserve Bank doesn't pay itself inordinate salaries and so on, but also to serve as a sounding board, which is why we have people from different walks of society. Yeah. Very eminent people have been on the board, including Dr. Kakodkar, Padma Vibhushan, Ila Bhatt, whose work is known all over India. These were people on my board. And when they spoke, you listened, because they had useful advice to give. They rarely tried to put themselves in the position of the professional sort of reserve banker and say, you must do this or thou shalt do that. Instead, we put proposals before them, and they weighed in saying, we would advise this or we would advise that. We'd go back and think and come back, and eventually they'd be fine with it. No, so my sense is the objective of the board is to protect the institution, not to serve as, to serve other interests. Yep. It is to protect the health of the institution, but also to provide wide sensible advice. Okay. Let me end by saying the aim of the board is to be a Rahul Dravid. Okay. Sensible, thoughtful, not, with due respect, a Navjot Sidhu. Okay. Well,
I'll just come to this in a bit. I have to quickly get a couple of questions through you. The Reserve Bank, the government started consultations with the governor under Section 7 of the Reserve Bank Act, which has never been used hitherto. So it clearly looks like the government wants to have its way. Does that upset you itself, per se, the usage of Section 7?
Well, I don't think the government has used it so far, and I don't know how many times the usage has been threatened in the past. So I don't think we should read too much into this right now. I think certainly it would be best if each side respected each other's sort of motivation and thoughts. And ultimately, the Reserve Bank, after listening to the government and hearing what the government's issues were, provided the best professional answer it could. And historically, it has done that. I have no doubt it is doing that today. It has a responsibility to fulfill to the nation, and it has to listen, of course. But at the end of it, after listening, it has to make a decision, because ultimately it has that responsibility.
Yeah, things apparently are much hotter than that. This is the information that we have got, that the government and the Reserve Bank and the board and the Reserve Bank also perhaps are not seeing eye to eye on several issues. Now, if on November 19th or earlier or later, the Reserve Bank governor finds that he's asked by the board to do something which he doesn't want to do, I mean, if there is a resignation, how bad can that be if the governor were to resign?
Look, I don't want to sort of address a hypothetical, and I hope that these issues are resolved. Ultimately, it can only be resolved if both sides respect each other's intent as well as autonomy. And I worry that in the recent past, a lot of unnecessary noise has been inserted into the board deliberations, and I wonder if this is something that can be unwound or rolled back, perhaps by taking away some of the people responsible for the additional noise. I think there is a healthy relationship, and in these uncertain times, and I think Dr. Acharya should be sort of commended for just sounding a warning. I don't think that, I've seen a lot of press saying he's comparing India to Argentina and so on. I don't think that was his intent in any way. I think he was just saying, let us be careful in these uncertain times. That's a warning that is important for us to heed, and heed it in the way it was given, respectfully, recognizing the fact that the RBI is not above the government. It is an arm, if you will, of the government, and saying, look, as a responsible part of the government, it is my duty to warn that there are certain sort of issues if we go further. I think that we should take that into account. These are not good times to be labeled a country which doesn't respect the autonomy of the central bank. One of the things that, as I said, that on the macro front we are doing well on is inflation. If in fact there is the worry that the government could run roughshod over a central bank, as Dr. Acharya pointed out, in some countries, it hasn't, been a good thing for that macroeconomy. And so I think respecting that warning and understanding India is very different from many of these countries, we should not walk down that path. And I think it's important for both sides to back off, and for some, hopefully, elder persons in the government, as well as former RBI people, to create a better understanding between the two. Okay. And it may, again, I say, require looking at what has prompted this sort of recent angst and trying to deal with that problem. Okay. Well,
I believe I'm running out of time, but very quickly, Trump has criticized Powell. Theresa May has criticized the BOJ, the BOE governor. If things came to a pass where the governor didn't want to continue, will it be taken in that stride that in all countries, even in developed countries, these differences are happening? And will it be taken in the stride, or can it be very damaging?
No, look, I think you have to look at the extent to which institutions are protected in different countries. I think in the United States, for example, Mr. Trump simply does not have the ability to fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve. The chairman has been approved by the Senate. And to that extent, there's a much more elaborate and different process. I think in India there has been an unwritten understanding that, in fact, there will be a viable relationship between the government and the Reserve Bank governor, and that these things will not get to a pass where the relationship breaks down. I think it would be very unhealthy to ever get near the position where things go further. So I think as far as possible, it is in the interest of the country that we stay away from that we respect the institutional autonomy of the Reserve Bank, as well as the traditions. Ultimately, this is about traditions on both sides, and that we respect the traditions that have got us the kind of institution which I think the Prime Minister on the 80th anniversary was very, very appreciative of the quality of the Reserve Bank, and I think we should protect it as a national institution.
Well, I do hope the relation between the government and the Reserve Bank is not as infructuous and as difficult to solve as it is between the United States and China.